I'm Helene Jacob, for those of you who are joining us who may not know me. And I want to thank everyone for participating tonight in the last session of what is the Monday series of the Akeidat Yitzchak in the Elul programming. And as the rabbi just mentioned, everyone should mute themselves so that background noises really don't contribute to interruptions. And then at a certain point, we'll come together and you can unmute as you'd like to speak. So tonight, we're going to examine some of the great works, not all, obviously, because there are many, but some of the great works of visual art depicting the binding of Isaac. And the Akeidat appeared in a wide range of contexts, demonstrating its importance and centrality to Jews and Christians over the ages. The story appears in two ancient synagogues, in medieval illuminated Hebrew manuscripts from Europe, illustrated Passover Haggadot from the Renaissance and Baroque periods, and a great variety of other Hebrew printed books on title pages, on printers' devices, and in the form of illustrations within the books. So as we go through the visuals, I'm going to describe, and I would like you to think about some of these questions, and then maybe you would have questions of your own that you can think of as well. So some of them are who or what is included and who or what is excluded in the visual. How did the artist express the emotion of the event? Is there evidence in these images of the many silences in the narrative? How is Abraham depicted? Is he depicted as a loving father? How is Isaac depicted? A willing participant? When it comes to morality, God asked for a human sacrifice. What do we have to say about that? And who is the test for? And then what are the consequences of Abraham's actions? And then some of this will be visible in the images, and others we can maybe glean from our interpretations. So is everyone familiar with the story, or do I need to review? Do I need to review the story? Very quickly, we know the challenge is that God tested Abraham when he said to him, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac, bring him up for a burnt offering. The question is when Abraham says to his servants, here and the boy and I will return. Dorothy, put yourself on mute, please.
I'm sorry.
Put yourself on mute. Yeah. Abraham then takes the wood with his son Isaac, with his knife and fire, and they both went up the mount together. And of course, the question is, Isaac says, Abba, where's the lamb? And his father answers, God will provide. And then we have the moments of fear. And this is what many of the master painters focused on in their works. When Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, he bound Isaac, placed him on the altar, and he stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. And then the angel of God stops him. Okay, so let's go on. And I'm going to screen share now and make sure that this is going to work for me. Here we go. Okay. So what we're going to look at first are some paintings and mosaics depicting the Akeidat story, which shows that Jews in late antiquity used art to connect with religion and community. And just before I start, three ancient synagogues. One is in present-day Syria, the remains of the Dura Europos, and two are in present-day Israel, the Sepphoris and the Beit Alpha. And what we will see are visuals or images that were used in the Akeidat scenes in both Christian and Jewish late antiquity settings. We're really going to look at the Jewish images. Okay, so let's look at the first. And this is from the 3rd century. This is the Dura Europos synagogue. This is one of the frescoes that is found in that synagogue. It's called the Torah niche with the binding of Isaac, and you can see where the Torah, the daily menorah that was there. But if you look in the right-hand corner, you will see the basic elements of the story. Isaac is on the altar. The hand of God is above. Abraham is holding his knife. The ram is caught in the thicket of the bush. If you then go, and we're going to really examine this one, and this is the Beit Alpha synagogue. This is one panel from that synagogue's floor. And you could see here that in this panel, we have 3 scenes and a linear mosaic. You might say that it's devoid of emotion, and it's essentially telling the narrative. So if we start from the right, we could see an altar of sacrifice with flames arising from it. And we see Abraham, okay, dangling a small Isaac over this altar as he raises his hand to perform the sacrifice, one hand holding the long knife and the other holding his son. And then we also see Abraham staring up at the hand of God, okay, and at the top of the panel. And underneath, we see the ram tied to a tree, standing on his hind legs. To the left of that, we see 2 young men, or the 2 boys, the servants of Abraham, who came with them, Abraham and Isaac, holding the donkey while viewing the Akeidat. There's very little background imagery to indicate any setting, only a few branches that are strewn throughout the panel, and a decorative row of palm trees at the top. We also see some inscriptions with the image, and if we look, we see the name of Yitzchak, we see the name of Abraham here, and then there are 2 inscriptions here. And so we have over here, we have Al Tishlach, do not stretch forth your hand, which is verse 12. And we have Behena Ayil, which is verse 13. Here is a ram. And the inclusion of these 2 quotes from Bereshit within the narrative are considered unique to the Beit Alpha mosaic. So some of the interpretations that I found regarding this narrative, one is by a graduate student in her thesis, Abby Masserano, who explains the use of the biblical quotes within the Beit Alpha narrative to, quote, demonstrate the congregation's connection to the words of Torah and to their religious history in the form of the story of Abraham and Isaac. Placing the sacred words in the center of the scene may have signified the exact moment when God acknowledges Abraham's devotion, drawing the eye to the pinnacle of the story and emphasizing the narrative's significance. In other words, to act as a prompt for the community members to reflect on or actively engage with the Akeidat narrative in this sacred space. It could also be said, as interpretations have indicated, that one can see the influence of Christian icons in which the ram is meant to prefigure Jesus on the cross. Ram in the middle, hanging down from a straight tree, representing a cross rather than being caught in the shrub. And I also listened to Mark Epstein, who is a scholar of visual art at Vassar College, He talked about witnesses to the event. And the question is, were there witnesses? And so in most of the images, the servants are really not in the visual or in the image. And Mark Epstein feels that the two observers standing with the donkey are us, meaning that we ourselves are in the picture looking on, linking the present with the past. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now and open to any ideas or thoughts that you may have based on just really these two. So if you want to add something, or if not, we can move on, but just unmute yourself if you have something to say. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so next I want to focus on, and I'm skipping some things I may have included, but I want to focus on something that is the narrative through folk art. Moshe Mizrahi, or Moshe Shah, he was born Moshe Shah, changed his name when he moved from Tehran to Jerusalem, Moshe Mizrahi. He was born in Tehran about 1870, and he was a folk artist. And he returned many times in his career to the Akeidat story. And there are multiple images of his, and many of them are in this one family's collection in Tel Aviv. It's called the Gross Family Collection. And he employed all the various techniques known to him at the time, from hand-painted images on paper to color lithographs and reverse painting on glass. He also was a traditional Jew, and he was trained in yeshivot, and he incorporated his Talmudic knowledge in his work. And this is his earliest Akeidat from 1901. And it has many of the features of folk art. So we could see that the panels are crowded with figures, which narrate the story in a series of consecutive episodes, and numerous inscriptions from all the way within to the border of the artwork are typical in folk art. And so because of this congestion of people and of words, there is very little that's left to the imagination of the audience, and every person and even the objects are identified. And so what happens is it leaves little to the imagination of the audience. So in this first Akeidat done by Mizrahi, there are two panels, and you could see the upper panel. We could say that the central image of the Akeidat is situated in this upper panel, but the story actually begins in the bottom panel, in the right corner. And so let's look at that now. So here we see Isaac. Isaac is shown here as a middle-aged man with a black beard, dressed in a long red gown, as he carried on his back pieces of firewood tied with a rope held by his left hand, while in his right, he's holding an object identified as the fire or the torch. And so we can relate this back to verse 6 in the text. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. And we see that Isaac here is not shown as a boy, as was common in Christian art and also in the works of European Jewish artists. Rather, Moshe Mizrahi's bearded Isaac follows the Midrashic tradition, which determines the age of Isaac at the time of the Akeidat as 37 years old. Now, we also see Abraham here as an elderly person with a white beard walking in front of Isaac. And he is armed with his knife, verse 6. And he took into his hand the fire and the knife, and they both went together. And in front of Abraham, we see two men, Turkish appearing figures. And these represent the men who accompanied Isaac and Abraham, who he ordered to stay here with the donkey, verse 5, as repeated in the large letters on the panel, Shavu lachem po im ha-chamor. So an interpretation or an analysis that I read is, what is the reason that Mizrahi emphasized or placed this emphasis on the donkey with the phrase? And according to Shalom Sabar in his analysis of Mizrahi's Akeidat works, a midrash explains that the servants were not capable of seeing what Abraham and Isaac could see in front of them. And the words im ha-chamor, with the donkey, with the ass, in the verse should be read as am ha-chamor, people like an ass. And this disparaging remark referred to the Gentiles and for Mizrahi in particular against the Ottomans ruling the Holy Land at the time he was living there. And I could add that it was unusual for a traditional Jewish artist from an Islamic land to show interest in figurative art. And of course, you can see up here is the actual, other narratives of the story. Figures of the narrative that tell the story, and the border inscription is quoting, and the binding of Isaac God remembers today for the sake of the seed of our father Jacob, which was something that God had said as a result of the Akeidat. And the tree is labeled, she is a tree of life for those who grasp her, and whoever holds on to her is happy, from Proverbs, and also reminds us of the tree of life in paradise, and the Torah is a tree of life. Okay, any thoughts or comments before I move on?
I just have a comment that the first two pictures, as you said, depict Yitzchak as Yaakov as Yitzchak as a child, whereas the third one shows him as an adult. But the other two had him all the way in the corner, sort of as a, tucked away, not the focal point. And the third picture has it as a focal point.
Well, as we see more, or especially, I looked at so many before I made my decision as to which to share. But Isaac that's the point, that in some he's depicted as a small child, and in others a teenager or as an adult. Anyone else? Okay, so let's move on. This one I'm just showing to you as a almost like a point of information, but I'm really not discussing this. This was one of the earlier pieces that I found. It's from a Hebrew Bible from Venice in 1739. It's an engraved piece that is currently in the JTS library. It's by Rissalini, and it tells the story essentially, in the order, and in the center, of course, is the moment, let's say. But this, again, as I mentioned earlier, there were many Hebrew Bibles, documents, etc., that had various Akeidat images. Okay, so let's move on now. And what I want to do now is talk about the single moment of trust in the divine. And we're going to look at two different images. And the single moment of trust in the divine, if we go back to verse 7, the question of where is the lamb that Isaac asks, and verse 8, and the response, God will provide. So we're going to look at two. One is, and we're moving on now to the Dutch and Italian masters. This is by Jan Victors, Abraham and Isaac before the sacrifice, done in 1642. It's in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. And we could see on the ground here, you can see some of the wood, all right? But as we look at it, we see Abraham leans gently toward Isaac and holds his hand. We do see a knife hanging from Abraham's coat. Isaac is portrayed as a young man who looks at his father questioningly, while Abraham comforts him with an answer. And we know, where is the lamb? And God will provide. So I call this the calm before the storm. And here is an etching done by Rembrandt called Abraham and Isaac, done just about 30 years later. This one was done in 3 years later. This is 1642, and Rembrandt did this in 1645. This is housed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And here also, we can see a caring image of Abraham. And one of the commentaries that I read stated that he's a tortured and loving soul, caught between his ties to family and his commitment to God and the future of a nation. And so, again, Isaac is holding the wood. Abraham has his knife ready. But with the hand gesture, if we look at that closely, and if we look at, I'll zoom in a little bit more on this so that you can actually look at his expression on his face and toward his son. Is he loving? Is he caring? Does he care about what Isaac is about to go through, etc.? So these are questions I'm posing to you and hoping that you will consider as we continue.
It's hard to tell because he's looking at him, but he's not putting his arm around him, or
I'll put it back up.
there's no like physical closeness. You don't know exactly from that picture. Here, you have the arm around him, so
Right.
it's, he's attempting to explain, and obviously he cares about him. Here the other one, he's a bit more detached, it seems.
And when we look at
You also have to see Isaac's expression here.
what was that, Aviva?
Isaac's expression, he's hearing it, but he
Doesn't seem like it's registering.
I'd say in the Rembrandt, there's a lot more tension between the two figures. It seems like, and that's intentional, not to have them physically touch, to heighten that tension between the two of them, because, Isaac looks like he's perhaps hearing something that he's very skeptical of or can't quite believe. And Abraham is a much more authoritative figure. And the other painting, it's a much more emotional affection between two people there, between a father and a son, in the attempt to comfort and reassure that God will provide. While I think the Rembrandt has a lot more tension involved between the two figures.
Right. If you look at the Rembrandt, the faces, I agree, Susan. because it's almost as a father might be even reprimanding and the reaction of a child looking at the father, what he's saying to him. So there is a lot more tension, maybe not so much of a reprimand, but it's like, I don't know what you're saying to me. What are you telling me? And the father is saying, just listen, putting his finger up, just listen to me.
The Rembrandt one with the finger up kind of made me think of he's pointing to God, like I have no choice, like this is
Right.
God is telling me to do this.
Anyone else? Okay, so now let's move to the moment, which is where all the emotion and horror is. So this painting is by Michelangelo Caravaggio. It's called The Sacrifice of Isaac from 1603. It's in the Uffizi Gallery. And Caravaggio's painting, as you can see, is quite graphic, filled with emotion and horror. And clearly, you talked about Isaac being terrified before. Clearly, Isaac is terrified as his father holds him by the neck with a knife in his other hand. And look how close that knife is to him. And the concealment of Isaac's hands emphasizes to the viewer the helplessness that Isaac is at the moment. A very human-looking angel grabs onto Abraham's arm as if to restrain him, perhaps frightened that otherwise he will carry through with this deed. And only the head of the ram, which we can see in the lower right, makes its way into the painting. And it waits by Isaac, but its gaze is intent on Abraham. And not to go totally unnoticed, but if you look over in this area on the far right, this represents where the two servants are waiting, which are, they're not part of the scene, but we do notice them there. So our first glance at Caravaggio's painting focuses on the horror in Isaac's face, depicted here as a teenager. And this is an illustration of what author Phyllis Tribble calls a text of terror. And I'm quoting here 2 parallel diagonals of light. Look at where the light is on this painting. Leads us from the face of Isaac to the angel, to Abraham, and to the ram. And despite these physical connections, the relationships are disconnected. The angel points approximately, but not directly, to the ram. Abraham looks approximately, but not directly at the angel. And Isaac approximately faces the viewer, but not directly. And only the ram looks directly at Abraham and the angel while nuzzling up to Isaac. The avoidance of eye contact, as stated, is Caravaggio's way of expressing the surreal madness of this scene. And we could ask ourselves, what was Isaac feeling throughout this episode? Was he a willing sacrifice, viewing the act as the ultimate show of devotion, or was he acted upon against his will? So let's check this one out for a few moments before we move on to another painting of terror. Anyone have a comment to make?
He does not look like he is willingly cooperating.
Yeah, against his will, I would say.
Yeah.
Against his will.
I mean, he's calling out. He's distressed.
He's clearly terrorized by this. And this painting, to me, it's very typical of Caravaggio, who would take that heightened emotion and heightened point in a story and give you it at its most dramatic point, inflection. And also that use of light in the way where you see the connection straight, like like a line just going downward, a vertical line between the angel and Isaac, so that and it always brings you back up to Abraham. I think in a way the ram's a little almost an afterthought because it's not as highlighted as much and you don't see as much of it. So there's this kind of triangle between Abraham, Isaac, and the angel, which is the immediate tension that's balanced there in this dramatic point in the story. And Caravaggio was a master at doing that.
Mhm.
I would have liked to see a little bit more of a relief expression on Abraham's face, because I'm assuming that the angel is telling him, hold off, don't do this. And he just looks confused, not relieved.
I think it's because this is the moment where the angel just comes in and grabs him. So he's like, he doesn't
Know.
It's the moment before he would have relief. That's why he doesn't have that. Also, going back to Caravaggio, he uses the light to bring your eyes to the important moments, just like the two men. See, there's just a little light in the background, so it brings your eye over there. It brings a little light on the ram's eye, bring your eye there. Wherever there's an important moment, he always uses darks and lights very well. That's his the way he always paints.
Right, but if you look at the lighting, it's really on the angel more and on Isaac, but Abraham's a little bit more not obscure, but he's a little darker. So the focus is really this diagonal between the angel and Isaac. And
Yeah,
then
there's also a triangle. There's a triangle.
No, I didn't finish. And then you can go up to Abraham, but the initial is the angel and Isaac, and then you go up to Abraham.
Yes. And that's how he uses his darks and lights very well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And just going back to, I'm not sure who said it, but, about, I think it was Susan who mentioned, that there would have been some relief on Abraham's face. But as I mentioned before, Abraham was tortured. He was a loving soul, but tortured. He had this split decision to make between his family versus his commitment to God and to the future of the nation. And so that's one of the problems that is shown here as well. Okay. So now we saw some horror here. Let's go and see some more horror. All right, so this is Rembrandt, and maybe I need to just make this a tiny bit small up. Okay, where do we go? Okay, so this is Rembrandt, painted in 1634. This is the one that's just about 30 years after Caravaggio. This is called Sacrifice of Isaac. This is in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And so here in this painting, okay, I'm trying to show as much as I can so that you see all of it. And so in this painting, Rembrandt captures all the drama in the culminating moment in this terrible intended sacrifice and the single-mindedness of Abraham to sacrifice his son. And if we go back to verses 9 and 10, and he bound Isaac, his son, and placed him on the altar upon the wood, and he stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. So here we see moments of great emotional tension. And when you we can see a clear and disturbing stretch of Isaac's body and the full weight of what Abraham is about to do. With one hand, Abraham is covering Isaac's face, and this is a first that we've seen, almost smothering him. And on the other hand, he has a knife in motion, showing, slowly falling, highlighting the tension. And the angel is about to stay Abraham's hand, just as he was about to sink the knife into his son's body. And looking at the refracted light from the angel to Abraham's beard to Isaac's chest. We sense that Abraham is looking at the voice of God instead of looking at his son. And this is revealed in his expressive gesture and the strong expression of his face. And that is what Rembrandt wanted us to focus on here, okay, is the vulnerability of Isaac at this moment. And one of the commentators or interpretations that I was reading also, Erica Brown is an author and director of Jewish educational leadership at GW University. And in her talk about leadership and the Akeidat, she examines Abraham extending his hand to do God's charge and not being able to stop himself. And she's saying it was God who pulls the task back from him. And in terms of her focus on leadership, this is just a little aside, she states that sometimes we need to pull back our hand, especially when we are in any leadership positions and are sacrificing the needs of ourselves or our family members. And at this time of year, reflecting upon how we might change if we need to. And if you notice, there is no ram in Rembrandt's piece because it was not in the scene yet. Rembrandt is focusing essentially on the two verses prior to the ram appearing. So any comments about Rembrandt in relation to Caravaggio or the Rembrandt painting itself? And the tension built in both.
This one seems so much worse. I really don't like this one at all. This one is horrible.
Worse in what way?
With his hand over his face, like not caring that he's his son. I mean,
And he was one step closer to sacrificing him until the angel intervened. So that's the horror of this one.
I feel that one of the horrible things about this one is that the way he's holding on to Isaac's face, Isaac could already be dead without the knife doing anything.
Well, and he's also focusing on his throat, that's
Yes.
holding his head that way because that's where he's going to sacrifice him.
It's like a chokehold, and it's
It's such a, I think here, like Isaac he's just displayed as a piece of flesh, which is much more as an animal, animal sacrifice than a human in a way, because you don't see his face. But I also think in this one, it's at a different moment because here Abraham is intently focusing on what he's hearing from the angel, from God. And in Caravaggio, it seems like, somebody else had said it was at the moment before, when the angel just gets there and interrupts, before he's even really speaking to him, because he has that kind of perplexed look on his face, like, why are you here? I'm supposed to be doing what God bid me to do. I don't understand why you're even here. And it seems like at this, the angel he's pointing, but he hasn't, it's a little hard to tell, but has he opened his mouth yet? While in the Rembrandt, to me, it's clear that there is some sort of dialogue that's happening, or monologue possibly, from the angel that's directed to Abraham. So, and he's intently listening to this.
Well, also because the knife has already fallen from his hand.
Yeah, he hasn't grasped. If he had grasped the knife previously, it's no longer. Although it's also what's unnerving about that is saying, where is that knife going to fall? Eventually, is it going to still cut him? Or not?
And in the Rembrandt, Isaac is totally immobilized physically and also verbally. But in the other one, he still is verbal in his, so that's a major difference also here with his hands behind his face covered, his mouth covered. But the other one, he still is active in some way.
He could call out.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
looking at the Caravaggio, there's a very linear element. There's a line going from the head of the angel to the head of Isaac, and the arm, the head and the arms, it's just going this way across. There's it's almost a still moment. But in the Rembrandt, you get a real sense of motion and drama, that something has already happened. Abraham, the angel has grasped Abraham's hand, and the knife has fallen from his hand. And the lines are the line of there are no lines in the picture. It's very curved, and the figures are interacting with one another in a very dramatic way.
But not Isaac in this one.
No.
Isaac is left out of it. It's only between Abraham and the angel. In the other one, there's more of an interaction in some way, whether physical or verbal, with all three.
Yes.
That's why you had the line and then the triangle. Here you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
In the first one, I'm sorry, I had to take a call, but in the first one, was that the Rembrandt? It
No,
almost
This is
appeared-
this
Oh,
is
so the-
Rembrandt.
Then the
This is Caravaggio.
Caravaggio. It almost appears as if the angel is pointing to the ram as sort of an explanation to stop.
Right,
He's got a pointed finger.
right. But what was being said is that a little too late? Was the angel a little too late when the angel, is being pictured doing that, as opposed to here, where he's actually pushing the hand so that Abraham does drop the knife. One of the things also, I examined many different images. I did not see one painter or in any other images where the hand of Abraham was over the face of Isaac. It could have been that he may have been held somewhere on his body, on, around the chest area, or maybe the abdomen, but not on his head, covering and almost smothering him.
Am I missing that the ram is not there on this?
Yeah.
Rembrandt?
The ram is not here because Rembrandt focused just on the moment of the actual deed to be, the sacrifice about to happen.
I think,
Not-
sorry.
Because that's the ram is in a later verse, that's why.
The hand over Isaac's face, I think you could interpret it two ways. I mean, a lot of people said smothering, but I could say it as an act of compassion that his son shouldn't see him and see what he was doing. And nor should he cry out, because it's the command that he must do this, so that he would prevent, because if he cried out, that might prevent Abraham from acting. So that his son shouldn't see what's about to happen, and also that Abraham suppresses his compassion by not having to listen to his son cry out.
Well, it reminds me of, I think the rabbi said it last week in one version or midrash or something. Isaac is asking Abraham to tie him up very tightly. So maybe that's part of this interpretation. He has his hands tied behind his back, so he can't, flail around his hands. He's holding his head very still. He's going to slaughter him literally, like you imagine shechting an animal, across the neck. So you have to immobilize it. So maybe that's what he's trying to do here.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so I have basically two more that we're going to look at. And I chose two where we're going to look at midrashic interpretations that were included in the paintings. And so before I move on to the image, this is Satan fooling Sarah, and the Midrash Tahuma goes like this. At the very moment, Satan went to Sarah and disguised himself as Isaac. So this is after, okay, after the angel of God says, do not cast or do not put your hand on Isaac. Satan goes to Sarah disguised as Isaac. And when she saw him, she asked, my son, what has your father done to you? And he answered, my father took me and made me climb up mountains and go down into valleys, and he made me climb up a certain mountain and build an altar. He set up the altar and arranged the kindling and bound me on the altar. He then took the knife to slaughter me. If the Holy One had not called out, do not cast your hand on this boy, I would have been slaughtered. He did not complete his sentence when Sarah's soul had already gone from her. Thus it is written, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to cry for her. And where did he come from? From Mount Moriah. So let's look at two images here. Okay, this first one, we are going to look at the bottom part. There are two panels in this, but I'm going to focus on the bottom half. And this is from the Regensburg Pentateuch from 1300s. The artist was David Bar Shabbatai. It was from the Ashkenazi community, and it is available in the Israel Museum. So if we look at this lower panel, we could see on the left part of the panel here, okay, the visuals of the story, all right? We have Abraham on the altar, and here you could see that he's in that animal-like position. Isaac is holding the knife, facing the angel, which is the hand of God appearing as the eagle. The ram we see down below in the thicket here, okay? But included in this work, on this part of the panel, all right, is an image of Satan lifting Sarah. And in the Midrash, Sarah sees from afar the moment that Abraham is about to sacrifice her only son, and she dies. And here the artist added in a distinctively Jewish element, an distinctively Jewish element of the Midrash. And so this is a small panel that shows that piece. As well, if we look at Chagall, Chagall does the same. Abraham ready to sacrifice his son. This is painted in 1960 watercolor. Chagall's painting puts before its viewer the familiar story. So we have the Abraham brandishing the knife over the body of Isaac. We have the angel hovering over Abraham. The upper right-hand corner in this muted sepia tones, we point ahead through time to the crucifixion of Jesus. And there's even the ram down here by the tree. Chagall, however, also includes midrashic interpretation. And if you look at the upper left edge here, there gazing at the scene stands a woman, Sarah. Her hands are raised in horror. Her eyes, like Abraham's, lifted up to the angel. Sarah's presence at the scene is the product of Chagall's imagination. Phyllis Tribble calls this the sacrifice of Sarah. Removed from both Abraham's encounter with the divine and from her son's side at a time of profound terror, Abraham is denied her place as both parent and partner. So these two, as I said, show some midrashic interpretation. And so we're going to stop here and wrap up some thoughts that we might have. But one question that I want to throw out after viewing all of these different images of the Akeidat, the binding of Isaac, is, do we see Isaac portrayed as bound in any of the visuals that we have examined? And maybe that's through interpretation.
He was bound. I mean, in the Rembrandt one, he was, and in the Caravaggio.
His hands tied behind, right? Mhm.
Maybe not all of them, but yeah,
Right.
like
Mhm. And we can think also of some of the other questions. Some of them we may have already talked about. Consequences of Abraham's actions. It's not stated here, but Abraham and Isaac, based on the Parsha and some other information, essentially did not have a relationship after this. And that's, looking at the end where Abraham goes off, there's no mention of Isaac again. And then also the relationship that Isaac had to the rest of his family. In the Parsha, it goes from here, and then it's okay. And Isaac was married to Rebecca, and then his whole life picked up again. There's very little that is spoken about in terms of Isaac's, religious faith himself, and was that taken away from him because of his father's actions?
I think a lot of times Isaac's portrayed as a very passive person after this, and when his relationship with his wife and his children. But I think he's like somebody who's a very traumatized person.
Mm-hmm.
His life is, how do you get past this and how do you get over this? And I don't think you do. Like you could have PTSD for life out of this experience, although they didn't call it that then, but it's clearly to me a traumatized person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I get to see everybody. I'm just looking to see who's here so I can get to see everyone.
May I add something? Miriam,
Sure,
you want
Rabbi.
to say something? Miriam?
Where's Miriam?
I thought that.
What he was like afterward, because we don't encounter him again until his first viewing of Rebecca.
Right.
There's a big gap there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rabbi, you want to add?
So the first thing I want to say before I add anything, Helene, is a huge Yishar Koach to you.
Thank you.
For your research, for the presentation, for enlightening us with things that are just wonderful art and how you put it together. So Yishar Koach. I like the way you went, because I didn't know how you were going to do it, and I am glad.
Neither did I.
But you somehow you chose to go at some points through the chronological order of the verses, and what happened when they walk together, what happened when Abraham talks to Yitzchak, and that relationship. And so I think that that was wonderful. So both in terms of the scope of artists from 2000 years ago to very recent, and to Chagall, and also throughout the story. the Midrash as well. So Yishar Koach to that.
Thank
For
you.
that.
You want to add anything, Talmudic or
No,
something? Okay.
again, I didn't know you added this idea, Shvu lachem po im hachamor, am hachamor, with the donkey, the people like that are like a donkey, and the Ottomans. I think that was wonderful. I didn't know about folk art, so that was, I think, a wonderful addition. And the Satan and Sarah, which I spoke about that in my presentation, but you added some color, literally and figuratively. So
I have one more that I'm just going to close with and just leave everyone with some thought. Does anyone have anything else they want to contribute before I do?
I want just to say one more thing, Helene, before I forget, is that to encourage everybody to join us tomorrow at 7:45,
Yes.
Brad Richman is going to do a change in movies. He's an expert in films, and I saw the PowerPoint presentation that he did, and I really encourage you to come. I think you're going to find it very meaningful. And then Daniela on Wednesday and Rabbi Kuliok on Thursday. So encourage everybody.
And let me just mention, most people, you don't know who Brad Richman is. Brad and his wife, their daughter had her bat mitzvah, I think it's probably almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. But I mentored Brad. He's younger than me, obviously, but he was young, and I mentored him, and eventually he became an assistant principal. So he is an assistant principal with the New York City Public Schools. And coincidentally, they joined to become members of Hillcrest. And he is a film buff, and so you probably will learn a lot from him. Okay, so I'm going to screen share this last piece, which is quite different. And I see what happened here. Some of these are a little too large for the screen, but this last piece, obviously very colorful, is by an artist whose name is Alan Falk. This is simply called The Binding of Isaac. This was done in 2002. And essentially, I'm going to read what I learned about him. And it's a little different angle. Falk's style of simple, bright color with pronounced outlines to present the startling image of the heavenly angel being simply another aspect of Abraham's personality, halting the sacrifice. The artist's take on this story is not merely psychological. It also posits that it is the divine aspect of Abraham who acts, pointing to the heavens for authority and confirmation. So if you look at the painting, it's really difficult to tell the difference between Abraham and the angel. It's the same face, it's the same dress, coloring. And so that is Falk's interpretation in his painting of what I just read. And also, I just noticed it. I didn't see it before, but again, he's doing what Rembrandt did with covering the entire face of Isaac. So that's where we're going to leave it, folks. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And I hope that you learned something. I certainly did learn something as I researched all of this. And as the rabbi said, please join the rest of the week. I know everybody can't sit in front of the computer every night, but if you have some time, please join, because these are very well organized programs that people have put a lot of effort into. So I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, thank you.
My pleasure.
Wonderful.
My pleasure.
Good night.
How do we
Okay.
view the
Very
ones that we missed? Can we
What's
do
that?
Since you recorded them?
Yeah, I guess,
Everything is recorded.
right.
How
So
do we view it?
So an easy way is to write to Melissa, and she will send you the link.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
an
maybe,
easy way.
maybe what we'll do, we can also publish the links, Rabbi. We'll
All
see
of
how
them,
that
or we
goes.
can do it after this week. Helene, maybe we can put an
Right.
email with all the links.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a
thank
good
you.
idea, yeah.
Yeah, I missed a few, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
Thank you, Helene.
All right, everyone. Good night.
Night.
Good night. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes,
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova Umtuka.